when I realized I was codependent and I started doing the research, that's when I knew I had to write a book about codependency. Thank my experience with him for teaching me what I needed to learn, which is ultimately to let go. If you like learning about codependency, narcissistic abuse, and how you can really develop your own self so that you can show up for yourself, don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notification bell. You'll be notified every time I upload a new video. When it comes to setting a boundary with someone, it can be terrifying. And it's terrifying for so many reasons, but let's break it down. So, as a recovering codependent myself, as somebody who felt powerless in relationships, as somebody who felt very unworthy, who felt broken, who struggled with a lot of shame, internal shame, and who thought that if I was good enough and I was able to take care of other people, and in the taking care of other people and ignoring of my own needs, then certainly that meant that I was good enough. And eventually I would find someone who saw worth in me and could see how good I was on the inside, and then I wouldn't have to play this stupid game anymore. It doesn't work. It's dysfunctional, right? It's immature. It's the result of childhood programming. It's the result of emotional abandonment, feeling rejected as a child, yada, yada, yada. And so we develop this codependence upon just about everything. And codependence attached to what people think. They worry about what people say about them. They are consumed with fixing other people and very oftentimes needing to be needed. We are over-responsible. We offer our opinions even when we're not even asked, right? And we think if people just listen to us, their life will work out just fine. And lots of times we know more about other people's lives than we do our own life. So codependency is very messy. It takes some time to undo. But it is possible, thank goodness. So now, if I'm codependent, I spend my time enmeshed with other people, right? And I'm not very good at setting boundaries. It's certainly not healthy boundaries. And the fear around that is if I set a boundary, you might leave me. If I set a boundary, then I'm creating distance between me and you. And in that distance, I feel raw. I feel vulnerable. If I set a boundary with you, what happens if you don't like it? What happens if you reject me? What happens in the rejection of me, then I lose control. Because as long as I'm taking care of you and you like me, then I feel like I'm in control. When I set a boundary and I put some space between me and you, in that space, you can see me. A boundary says, this is who I am. This is what I think. This is what I need. When I set a boundary, I'm creating this space where you're able to see me more clearly in a more authentic way. And that takes guts. When you begin to set boundaries, you are becoming more and more vulnerable. You are becoming more and more authentic. And it is a struggle to be able to be that vulnerable and know that in this space, you can throw a rotten tomato at me. Right? Think about it. When you're enmeshed with someone, there's no space between you and that other person, right? You're really, really in close. You ever hear the expression, keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer? When you are enmeshed and you've got your finger on the pulse of this other person and you're hypervigilant and you're constantly trying to figure out where they are, right, and how they feel, and you're anticipating their needs, you're lost in that. And you're lost in that, and in that space, you feel in control of the outcome. It's like living your life on your nose on the ground, looking for potholes, and never picking your head up to look at a sunrise or a sunset or a beautiful flower, or a bird in the sky. You're just always looking for the next pothole so that you can anticipate the pothole, get out ahead of the pothole. Let's say you're living with a narcissist who snaps his fingers in your face, or she snaps her fingers in your face, or she screams in your face, or they refuse to pay for their part, of the financial responsibilities, whatever. And then there's, when you ask, there's a problem or there's an argument. So you get out ahead of those situations, you anticipate the outcome, and you try to prevent the negative outcomes from happening. Your finger is on the pulse of the other person. You're hypervigilant. So there's really not a lot of space, emotional space, between you and this other person. So when you end up saying, I think, I feel, I need, I don't like that, I prefer doing this, you are emotionally detaching and you're taking your finger off the pulse of this other person. And in that space, this person gets to see you for who you really are. Now, the reason that's so scary is because so many of us, codependents and non-codependents, lots of us carry shame from the past, from childhood. Lots of us have felt abandonment, whether it was in childhood or with our peers, or we felt rejected, or we just, grow up feeling like we don't fit in. That all creates shame. And so the shame, when I separate myself from you in that space, you can abandon me, and then I might be triggered again feeling abandoned, right? And so I carry this shame with me. I hate the way it feels. I'm running from it. I don't know that I'm running from it. My codependent behaviors are such where I'm staying engaged with people in a dysfunctional way, but at least I think I'm able to control how they see me. At least I'm controlling, I'm the peacekeeper in the house, and I'm the caretaker, I'm the rescuer, and at least it feels like everything's okay, even though inside nothing feels okay. When you're a codependent, nothing feels okay on the inside. It doesn't matter how nice and neat and tidy your house looks on the outside. You are not okay. Male or female, you are not okay. And so when you're setting a boundary, it takes great courage to say, this is what I think and this is what I need. And you know what? I know you might reject me. And that is my deepest, deepest wound. Having you say to me, I don't like that about you. Having me expose myself to the possibility of feeling incredibly rejected by you. I'm going to do it anyway. Because if I don't tell you who I am, then you don't know who I am. So even if you tell me that you love me, I can never really be sure if you love me if I don't tell you who I am. Boundaries help you define who you are. Boundaries help other people understand who you are and what you need. And so setting a boundary, saying, acknowledging I have this boundary, is an act of absolute courage. You have to be vulnerable to put yourself out there and say, this is what I think and this is what I feel. Knowing that when you do that, people in that space, right? When you peel yourself off the wall, right? And I love the way Brene Brown talks about, being vulnerable in one of her talks, and having people ridicule her and mock her, and how she ended up being able to process that as you know what, not for nothing, but you're not doing what I'm doing. Your opinion really doesn't matter. If you're not pulling yourself off the wall, if you're not being this vulnerable, you're not putting yourself out there, then what you have to say to me really can't hold that much weight in my life. So yes, when you put yourself out there in any way, shape, or form, whether you're a public speaker, whether you're going for a new job, whether you're telling your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend how you feel, or if you're enmeshed with your children and you're saying, you know what, this dynamic, I'm not happy with it and it has to stop. You are peeling yourself off the wall. You're saying, this is who I am. This is my point. This is the boundary that I need with you. You're creating space between you and this other person. And in that space is the opportunity for them to throw a rotten tomato at you, right? If you're enmeshed, this person can't hit you with the tomato because you're so enmeshed, you're so close. But the minute you create space, dear one, that's when things get hairy. And that's when you can get hurt. The important thing to remember is that you are enough. It's not you, it's your programming. And it's not your fault that you carry shame in the first place. When you set a boundary, you're saying, here, I want you to have a good look at who I am. I want you to understand that this is what I stand for. I want you to understand that this is what I will tolerate and this is what I will not tolerate. Have a good look at me. When you struggle with shame, that is terrifying. because that is where all your vulnerability really is. I'm asking you to look at me. I want you to know that this is my boundary, right? And I know that if I set this boundary, I'm rocking the boat. And if I set this boundary, you can say, go scratch your nose. I want nothing to do with you. I don't like this boundary. Boom. Then my abandonment trauma is triggered. That's when I have to remind myself that I am enough. Even if you don't like me, I am enough. Even if you accuse me of things that I'm not good enough, that I'm not guilty of, I am enough. Even if you insinuate that I'm not good enough, I am enough. Even if you walk away from me, smear my name, tell people that I said and did things that I didn't do, I have to know in my heart, if you don't want to be with me anymore, I am enough. I have to be enough for me, right? And that is really the opinion that we have to adopt of ourselves, that we are worthy and we are enough. And it's okay if and when people come in and out of our lives. The goal for us is to define who we are and to believe it and to walk a life in which represents who we really, really are, and to walk with integrity and to walk with grace and to mind your own business. Just do you, boo. Like, do you. Like, let everybody else do what they want to do. You will find your tribe. You will find your tribe. Your job is to define who you are so that you vibe with yourself. And the more you vibe with yourself, the more you're eventually going to attract people who truly vibe with you, who are your true vibe tribe, right? Enough of this dysfunctional stuff where you're staying in relationships that are dysfunctional and narcissistic and codependent, and avoidant and nonsense. That's not why you're here. You're here to really, really embrace who you are and to live out loud and to say, this is who I am. And in this space, I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to tell you who I am. And yep, now you can judge me. Go right ahead and judge me. But you know what? I'm still going to be who I am. I'm still going to be who I am, regardless of you abandoning me. So the reason that boundaries are so scary is because once you set a boundary, you create that space that was never there before. You're saying, here, have a good look at me. This is who I am. I want you to know me, and I want to know you, right? If I'm going to give you my time, I need to know you. And if I'm going to give you my time, I want you to know me. This is the way it has to work. No nonsense, no make-believe stuff. You're not perfect, and I'm not perfect. I just want to see how much of your imperfection I can tolerate and how much of my imperfection you can tolerate, because nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? But we're definitely looking to find people that are in resonance with, so much of who we are. I set a boundary with my narcissistic mom, and now my siblings won't talk to me. My narc mom has cut me out of her will. I feel so alone. Is there any science behind this, and what can I do? So today we're going to be talking about the daughter of a narcissistic mom who set a boundary with her mom, who is now being punished for setting a boundary. Ha ha ha, doesn't that sound so familiar? Have you ever set a boundary with someone and been punished for setting a boundary? I know I have, so let's talk about it. So this YouTube viewer is asking me, is there any science behind setting a boundary with someone and having them punish you, and even the siblings taking part in the punishment as it relates to having a narcissistic mother, right? Absolutely. So when we have a narcissistic parent, very oftentimes we have flying monkeys as siblings. We also have triangulation, where the parents are going out of their way to triangulate the children against one another. And I think this is one of the saddest things that happens in a narc family, because it debilitates the siblings' ability to get along. Even in my own family, I love my brother and my sister, but you know what? Since my brother and my sister were small, especially between my brother and I, my mother, God rest her soul, would triangulate with my brother against me. What they do is, behind closed doors, they're talking poorly about one child with another child. Now what ends up happening is, now this creates a situation where the child who's being chosen as the flying monkey has an opportunity to bond and seek validation with narcissistic mommy, right? So this reinforces the bond that the child naturally needs with mom, and the child who's being abused this way and groomed this way to be a flying monkey is not aware of what's going on. So at the same time, there is a child, the scapegoated child in the family, that is being outed by not only mom, but other siblings, because who wants to go against the big bad wolf, right? Nobody. Everybody wants to be in the company and in the graces of the big bad wolf, except the person who's been outed from the family, except the scapegoat who has been identified as the problem, right? So the child that's been identified as the problem child is the child that the entire dysfunctional family projects their dysfunction upon. You see it all the time. So the child that is emotionally honest, the child that is struggling with addiction, perhaps, this child who is getting into trouble, everybody's staring at this child getting into trouble. But God forbid we look within and we identify how we have outed this child, made this child feel alone, right? And how the parents have triangulated the children against this one child. And God forbid we look at the problems of the parents. Happens all the time. And you know what? It happens in families where you don't even believe it could happen. In the families that look the best, right? The parents that look like they've got their crap together. Meanwhile, this is going on. In this YouTube viewer's situation, she's beginning to feel alone. She's been outed from the will. The siblings aren't talking to her. This is classic narcissistic family behavior. It's like a gang mentality, right? So I've had clients in similar situations. Now, the science behind feeling alone is absolutely valid. We're talking about abandonment trauma. We're talking about a narcissistic mom who was unable to create a nurturing bond with her child. And children feel that for the rest of their lives. And that sets them up for codependency, low self-worth, feeling unworthy, and not feeling good enough, right? All that juicy stuff that we have to deal with as adults, right? And because we're unconscious, we don't even realize that it goes back to our childhood. Whatever, okay? Getting back to the YouTube viewer. So now she's asking a pretty cool question is there science behind me feeling so alone? Yes, this is abandonment trauma, and this is a trigger. And you, the psychological self that you know, the inner child in you, knows that you're being abandoned. And because you never, and it's created this hole inside of you, right? Those of us who have been abused by alcoholic parents, narcissistic parents, whatever, been shifted around in foster care, many times when children are adopted out and there's been a disconnect between the natural biological mother and the natural biological family, we can experience these things, this hole in ourselves. It's not our fault. It's natural. Our connection to the mothership has been interrupted, okay? It's not our fault that we leak this energy for attachment the rest of our lives and we end up below the veil of consciousness like half the world or most of the world, and we recreate these patterns. This is karma. Karma is cause and effect, and we can get ourselves off this karmic wheel, but not until we become conscious of what's really happening. So now the science is abandonment trauma. You're being triggered. Now what can you do about it? In a nutshell, we have to accept what we can't change, right? So my 1, 2, 3 process, I have videos on the 1, 2, 3 process that you can look on my YouTube channel. But in a nutshell, it looks like this. You have to accept what you cannot control. You also have to accept how you feel. Your feelings are valid, right? Enough with shaming victims and, oh, you're playing the victim. Oh my God. Would we tell someone who was sexually abused that they were playing the victim? Okay. So we have to grow up in the world, right? And understand that people who have emotional pain, that are talking about how they feel, are not playing the victim. There's been abuse there. Psychological abuse is real, okay? And those of us who are brave enough to talk about it are just looking for an opportunity to heal it and get over it, all right? This is part of the process, talking about how we feel. Just saying, okay? I develop processes and systems of change to help that person who wants to heal understand the science behind it, understand the neurology behind it, the chemistry behind it, and the psychology behind it so that you can heal. So you have to understand, dear one, that this hole is here, that this abandonment trauma has been triggered. And mom has done a very poor job at filling it. And unfortunately, throughout your life, she has actually helped to dig the hole deeper. That is not your fault. Accept that the hole is there, okay? Accept how you feel. You feel abandoned. Hello, abandonment. You are being abandoned. Your entire family is turning their back on you because of the big bad wolf, and they don't want to be out of her grace. Accept it. That is literally how you feel. What we do wrong is I call it layering, although it's not a psychological term. One day maybe it will be, but when we layer how we feel, I feel abandoned, but I don't want to feel abandoned, but I do feel abandoned. Oh, damn, I don't want to feel abandoned. I feel abandoned. I hate that I feel abandoned. I feel abandoned. I feel so depressed that I'm abandoned. No, just allow yourself to feel abandoned. That's pretty hard to do. We're trying to learn how to stay in our body while we feel a painful emotion, okay? That's the crux to learning how to heal. That's the crux of moving our consciousness forward. Pretty amazing when you learn the power of accepting how you feel. When you develop empathy for yourself, which, by the way, dear one, is what you always needed. Empathy from a divine mother and a divine father energy, so that you could process how you feel, so you didn't have to dissociate and develop all sorts of cockamamie beliefs about how you feel. I'm not good enough, whatever, okay? Accept how you feel. Feel your feelings in your body. Identify where you feel them. Then you have to make a decision. You have to ask yourself, what can I control about this situation? What can I not control about this situation? And what decision, what action step? This is an action-based universe. You can't get stuck in the emotional realm. You have to take action, right? They have to be positive and affirming actions that help move you forward. Otherwise, you stay in neutral and sometimes in spiritual reverse and vibrational reverse. In terms of what's happening in the matrix, you stay stuck in a negative mirror. You stay stuck in a negative reflection. You end up recreating this abandonment in future relationships. No bueno. You're too beautiful and too magnificent and too divine to live an unconscious life. Let's kick you out of that mirror, okay? Third step, you've got to make a decision, dear one. Can you control that mama cut you out of the will? No. Can you continue to focus on that? Yeah. Does that help you? No. What can you do? Pretend there was no will. Pretend there is no mama. Pretend there are no siblings, and get on with your life. Accept how you feel. Know that they are abandoning you, and put that in a box and say, it is what it is, but I can't control that, and I'm going to do this, okay? When I got divorced, my parents moved to Pennsylvania, okay? Left me in New York with 3 children, single mom with no job, by the way, with an ex-husband who was hell-bent on destroying me. For 7 years, he hunted me down. And about 7 years later, he actually admitted to me, it was my intention to destroy you because I thought you'd come back to me. Oh yeah, that's genius logic if you ask me, right? Genius, hello. All it did was make me stronger. It made me say, okay, you're not around and you're doing this to me, watch me fly. And I focused on getting certified. I became a personal trainer. I became a certified sports nutritionist. I found ways to make money. I began cleaning houses. I sold tents for a while. I had 3 jobs and I worked 7 days a week. You know why? I didn't want anybody controlling me. And here I am today. I finished my first book, then I finished 5 more. All became best-selling books. I'm not bragging. What I'm trying to tell you is that when I stopped focusing on the crap I couldn't control, and I started focusing on the stuff I could control, and I aligned with my divine energy and my purpose, which has empowered you to awaken and live above the veil of consciousness, because that's your right. When I aligned with that, my life began to take off. I got out of neutral and I stopped going in reverse. And I want the same thing for you. You know why? Because you deserve it. All of us deserve it. But we have to awaken from the mirror. We have to awaken from living below the veil. We have to awaken to our truth. Yes, if you've been abandoned, you've been abandoned. And the sooner you accept that and really, really feel it in your body and process those emotions and begin focusing on what you can control, the sooner your life will accelerate off in an entirely new direction, because you do have the ability to be the master of your reality. But here's the thing. You have to find the field of potential that is within you, okay? And the field of potential can only be found when you let go of focusing on what you can't control. Because when you focus on what you can't control, you keep yourself in neurological loops of dysfunction. The field of potential exists between each synapse. And you have to interrupt the old patterns to find that synapse, or that field of potential, so that you can become the master of a future desired reality. I hope that that moment starts now.
It's really uncomfortable to have to push people back. It's really uncomfortable to have to set a boundary with someone. It's really uncomfortable to have to confront someone and say, hey, knock it off. You know, that's not cool with me. And I don't think it's wise for us to look for problems in life, because you generally find them. But I do think it's important to recognize when something has happened to you in your experience that requires for you to set a boundary. Otherwise, people just generally push you around. We all have heard people say that we teach people how to treat us. And I'm 55 now, and I can tell you that through a lot of deep emotional, spiritual recovery work, I can absolutely attest to the idea that that is a very true statement. When you lack self-confidence, when you lack a sense of self, you can't have self-confidence unless you have learned to find the self. And you can't find the self unless you know how and what you feel. Adults know what they feel. Children will struggle to identify what they feel. But adults, healthy adults anyway, know what they feel. Healthy adults know what their values are. Healthy adults know where their boundaries are. Healthy adults know what they will and will not tolerate. And a huge part of being able to set a boundary has to do with recognizing how we feel. How do you know that someone has crossed a line if you don't know how you feel? If you are someone who has been, unfortunately, abused in your life, maybe as a child you were taught that your feelings were irrelevant. Maybe your home was unpredictable. Maybe as a way to survive, you had to detach or dissociate from your feelings. So as a result, you end up repressing your feelings. You end up suppressing your feelings. Now, that's not your fault if that's what you needed to do to survive. The problem is that if you are still cutting yourself off from your emotions, then it's going to be difficult for you to set appropriate boundaries. When we are in a fight or flight situation, we might run away from our feelings, or we might be so attached to our feelings that we're super, super reactive. And so learning to stand up for ourselves and learning to feel and learning to set a boundary is all part of the adult process, or becoming an adult. If you're codependent, then you might feel like an adult in a child's body. When someone crosses your boundaries, you might freeze and not know how to respond. I know that I've been in that situation. I just had a coaching session last week, and my client said, this person said this to me, and when I went home, I thought about what she said, and I was like, say what? Like, how could she say that to me? And this is what I should have said. That happens a lot. It's in retrospect. It's when we've come out of that immediate trauma response to freezing to this idea that someone has said something to us, and we can have this visceral experience in our body. In other words, our body could send us the message that a boundary has been crossed, but due to codependency or due to trauma, CPTSD, we might freeze in the moment and almost feel like our brain fizzles out from some type of a panic response where we go silent. We don't know how to protect ourselves. We don't know how to defend ourselves. It could be that because we weren't modeled how to have safe conversations around boundaries as a child. We just don't have the data to know how to do that. So we don't know what it looks like to say, hey, knock that off. Or I don't like the way that feels. Or no, I don't think I want to do that. Or as children, we might have said no and we were gaslit, or we were criticized, or we were mocked, or we were told that we didn't have the right to say no. And so we were disrespected. And so, again, we have no program or data for how to say to someone, no, you have to stop that, please, or I don't like that, or we need to do something else. It really is like we're missing that chip that allows us to say, this is what I think, and this is what I feel, this is what I need, this is what I'm willing to do, and this is what I'm not willing to do. And so this idea of standing up for ourselves when someone has crossed a boundary is very complex. I think a major pitfall to being able to stand up for yourself has to do with not being quite sure that you have a right to say no. And you might struggle with thinking that someone else's response is your responsibility. And so when someone shows up and they're angry, or they're aggressive, or they're accusatory, They're blaming you for things that you didn't do, or they're forcing their opinions on you. And you think it's your job to smile to make the other person feel better about themselves, or you're highly agreeable. You have a personality trait of agreeableness compared to someone who is more disagreeable or distrusting, or who has a more difficult time being forgiving. So if you're somebody who is highly agreeable, when you're speaking to someone and they're being intrusive or they're pushing your boundaries, you might struggle a little bit with feeling like it's your responsibility for how this person feels. You might feel like it's your job to make this person feel better. You might feel like if this person's being hostile or accusatory, that you are responsible or you should feel guilty for what's coming out of this person's mouth. And I think that's part of the trauma response. It's like, we don't know how to respond. We're wondering if we're responsible for how this person feels. If you come from a trauma background, you might be struggling with shame. This person's angry. This person disapproves of me. And if you think about how a child responds when an authority figure lets it be known that they are not happy with this child, you'll see shame wash over the child. The child will feel very insecure that this authority figure has seen something or is disapproving of this child. They did experiments with babies where it was a facial experiment where they asked moms to play with their babies that were sitting in high chairs. And the researchers then asked moms to just go flat, like no expression. Don't smile at the baby. Just sit right in front of the baby, but show no emotions. It's really an uncomfortable experiment to watch because you see these tiny babies like laughing and cooing and trying to get an emotional connection from their mom, but they can't. And when they can't, they grow very, very uncomfortable in their skin. They're literally, their body is telling them, uh-oh, something's wrong. I've lost this contact. I've lost this bond with this person that I love, and they're physically uncomfortable in their skin. This is a limbic response to the disconnect that a child will feel when they no longer feel like they're on the same page with mom, when they no longer feel like they are on a vibrational match with mom. Something's off, and the child, no matter what the child has tried to do, laughing, grabbing at the mom, smiling, can't make the contact with the mom. So if you can imagine how a child might feel when a child knows that mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, or teacher, whoever, or even a stranger, is disapproving of them. The child feels responsible for how this person is receiving them. Children are egocentric. Everything is their fault, so they think. And so when we come from homes like that, sometimes we never grow out of that very childlike response to someone else disapproving of us, or someone else crossing a boundary, someone else being intrusive. We sort of just feel like there's absolutely no shell to us, that people can say and do whatever they want to us. And we can literally have this panic response where we freeze like we did when we were children, and it feels like we've been violated, but we don't have the life skills that we were supposed to have been taught as children to push back right away. Some of us just don't have that default to push someone back. Many of us just freeze. Many of us stumble with our words. Many of us get flushed in the face. Many of us have this response where our heart is beating out of our chest because a cashier or someone on the road has done something to us that makes us feel uncomfortable and has violated a boundary. So we don't have the response necessary. So I wanted to help everybody think about a few things that I think might help them if this sounds like you. If you struggle to stick up for yourself when someone violates a boundary of yours, know that you're not crazy. Know that this is a very common situation. Many of us who struggle with self-confidence, many of us who are really, really struggling to rebuild our self-esteem and or our self-confidence after a narcissistic relationship or a bad breakup. Many of us who came from dysfunctional homes where these are just life skills we never learned. We're just trying to play catch up. I remember when I first started the road back to me, when I first started on the codependency healing and recovery journey, I had to come face to face with the reality that I was a child in a grown-up's body, that I was raised by children, that I was not taught how to think and feel and express myself as an adult. My ideas, even around my boundaries, were all screwy. And so it took me quite a while to get through this codependent thinking, to pierce the veil of unconsciousness and to live a more conscious life, to really look at myself and to figure out what were my values, what did I hold near and dear to my heart, what would I tolerate, what would I not tolerate, what did I think was worth pushing someone back for. You know, if there's a Joe Blow on the street and they say something to me, I really don't waste my time. If there's somebody who gives me the finger on the road, I don't waste my time. You know, if someone is, saying something to me online at a grocery store, I don't really waste my time. There are just certain things in life that just really aren't worth getting into it with. If I have an issue, however, with a family member and there is the chance of this blowing up and becoming bigger than what it necessarily has to be, I might want to confront that. If it has to do with a situation in which someone can get hurt, I might want to get involved with that. But a lot of the times we really have to figure out whether or not something is worth our time and whether or not something is really worth getting into or hashing out with someone or not. I think that one of the things that we really need to look at is figure out who in our life is really important to us, whose opinion matters. And certainly if there's something that arises between you and that person, it may be time to have a conversation about boundaries, because it's important to express what your needs are. And if the person cares about you and is empathic, they'll listen. If the person doesn't really care about you, then you might have held a higher value in that relationship than they actually hold for you and the relationship. When you're considering what it takes to stand up for yourself, there's a whole lot that has to go on before you get to that point where you can actually stick up for yourself. And number one, so sticking up for yourself means you're an adult. And what I mean by that is that when you are sticking up for yourself, you are mature. You have mature ideas. They're not immature ideas about people and yourself. For instance, when you're a mature adult, you recognize that not everybody has to agree with you. You recognize that just because you feel a certain way and you have a certain perception doesn't mean it's 100% correct. It means that if you have something to say to someone that you care about, you're open to expressing how you feel appropriately, but you're also open to what this other person has to say for the sake of negotiating an outcome that suits both of you. And so that's a very mature thought. Before I understood codependency, I was under the assumption that because I was a caretaker and a rescuer, and because I did so much for other people, I was under the assumption that people should read my mind. And so if I said I was tired, then that meant that you shouldn't call me and ask me if you need a ride to the doctor because I told you this morning that I was tired. That is going around the mulberry bush for a codependent, because codependents struggle with asking for what they really need and asking for what they really want. And so rather than me saying, I'm tired, I think I'm just going to relax today, I think I'm just going to have a self-care day, and I know that you need a ride to the doctor, maybe you can ask so-and-so, it's just not going to be me today, I just can't do it. That's a very adult way of handling a feeling and setting a boundary. But I didn't know how to do that because I didn't think that what I thought and what I felt was important enough. I didn't think it was valid. And mixed in with that was this idea that it was my job to live a life of servitude. It was my job to be the quicker picker-upper. It was my job to be the mop and the broom. Crazy making. I had no sense of self. There was no one taking care of Lisa. Lisa was almost robotic in taking care of and seeking out, like a missile, trying to figure out what this person needed, what that person needed, and trying my best to be what other people needed me to be. This is the way that I was programmed. I was programmed to think that what I needed was irrelevant, and if I dared have a need, I was labeled selfish. I was raised by two immature children in adult bodies. Not their fault, because they were both unrecovered adult children of alcoholics. However, there were still consequences to being raised by two highly immature, in my opinion, emotionally arrested children who acted like children and who raised my brother, my sister, and I to be just as dysfunctional as they were. And this pattern just continues because life is holographic. It unfolds because of patterns and programs. And when I began to realize that, oh my God, I was not thinking like a healthy adult, I was frustrated, then I began to understand that the problem was in the way that I was thinking and I needed to address it. And I was very in touch with the shame of recognizing that I had done to my children many of the things that my parents had done to me. And it took a lot of courage and strength to face that fear and to face that reality. Narcissists don't want to change. They don't have empathy for their children when they realize they have wounded their children. They scoff it off. They don't believe that their children are hurt, or they believe that their children deserve to be hurt. I used to say to my ex-husband, that what you just said hurt him. Well, he should feel that way. It's good that he feels that way. Or you lied to your daughter and she's crying. Well, good, I'm glad she's crying. There was no remorse. There was no guilt. And without that connection to pain, without that connection to empathy for someone else, narcissists can't change. They have no desire to and no reason to. And how a narcissist works is once you confront the narcissist and you're done with them, you discard them, you're done, then they go and they find another source of narcissistic supply that is more than happy to idealize them and to reinforce their narcissism. And so the cycle continues. And so this idea of being able to stick up for yourself, let's just talk about what it takes to be able to do that, please. Because in order to stick up for yourself, we're assuming that we're adult-like in our thinking. So number one, you have to be able to identify your feelings. Like I said earlier, children have a very difficult time identifying their feelings. They don't know that they have a right to acknowledge this violation. They don't feel like they have a right to say, hey, knock it off. They feel powerless. They know that people are bigger and stronger than them and that they're dependent upon these people. And so children generally don't have the ability to stick up for themselves, and they don't always know how to identify a particular feeling. And so in order to stick up for yourself, you have to be able to center yourself and know how you feel. The second thing, you have to be able to recognize when a boundary has been crossed. And so if you don't know what's important to you, if you don't know what your values are, if you don't have a healthy sense of self, then you don't know a boundary has been crossed. I've watched my mom deal with this day in and day out, where my father would, I remember one time she worked all day. My mom was a letter carrier. She worked all day, lived in New York. She was walking up these steep hills, and sometimes she'd slide on the ice when it snowed and it was slippery. She would come home some days completely exhausted. Her hair was wet, her clothes were drenched, cold weather in New York, And this one particular day, I remember sitting there And my mom had just changed into a robe, and my father said, you know, if you just got a little bit of a tuck, you can get rid of that wrinkle. And she just looked at him, but she never ever really pushed him back. It was like she froze from his inconsideration, and she was so full of disgust, but she never set a boundary with him. She never said, you just crossed a line, dude. And I was devastated that my mom worked all day. My dad had the audacity to say this to her and then just act like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. That was the way he let her know that, you know, her age, she was aging, and that he was taking note of it, right? That's the way my dad would let my mom know that he was checking her out and that she should feel a little bit insecure and that he was on it, you know, which is cruel. Why would you do that? But in order to be able to push someone back, or in this case, in order for my mom to be able to push my dad back with like, I'm not putting up with that type of talk. That's unacceptable, that you'd want me to feel bad about the way that I look. And by the way, you're not working, I am. So maybe we need to like rethink how you're showing up right now, because I'm not going to tolerate that. You took a jab at me unnecessarily, and no, it's not funny. For my mom to be able to say that, she would have had to recognize that a boundary is actually crossed. In order to be able to say that, you need to feel safe, right? You need to know that the person, at least think that the person that you're talking to is actually going to hear you. And that is something that my mother did not have. She did not have the feeling of safety and trust that my father was actually going to listen to her. So in her case, she, I think, suffered from learned helplessness. And so my mother was unable to stick up for herself, which is part of why I think I'm so passionate about teaching people how to push back, especially with narcissistic others. Another interesting thing about being able to stick up for yourself is recognizing that and identifying why you need to express yourself. Like, in other words, like, in order for you to stick up for yourself, you need to recognize what's going to happen if you don't. You have to have the ability of foresight. You have to know that, if I don't put a boundary in place now, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And I think lots of us who struggle with standing up for ourselves, when we freeze, we're not thinking about what's going to happen in the future if we don't end this now. We're thinking, or we're overwhelmed by a panic response. Our limbic brain has been activated, and we're so caught up in the freeze response that we're not thinking about the future. We're just thinking about now. Like, we're in pain now. This person's upset with us now. We don't have the resources or the skill set to push back. We're just in pure panic mode. Our brainwashing tells us that it's our fault that this person is saying this to us. We're so upset that this person doesn't like us. We're upset about how this person feels. We're feeling all sorts of guilt and shame. And so we're just overwhelmed. And so in order to set a boundary, you need to be able to see into the future and recognize what's going to happen if I don't set this boundary. My mom never set a boundary with my dad. And I think if she had been able to look ahead rather than get stuck all the time and not feeling like she was his equal and feeling super responsible for keeping him happy. If she had had the ability of foresight, if she had had the ability of insight and recognized, if I don't shut this guy down now, what's it going to be like? You know, when I'm 70, 72, and 73, what's it going to be like when I get older? And sadly, when my mom had a stroke, my dad was angry. He was angry for a lot of reasons. And when she needed him, he was there in some ways, but in lots of ways he wasn't. In lots of ways he was very angry that my mother had a whole bunch of needs and she could no longer acquiesce to him. And you need to learn to believe that you can express yourself in an appropriate manner. This is huge. So like, when you need to stick up for yourself, it's not about becoming this big grizzly bear and screaming and yelling and losing your cool. It's not about making sure that the other person feels this big. No, that's not what this is about. Sticking up for yourself is recognizing that I have a right to express myself in this situation, and I know how to keep calm and cool and I'm going to express my emotions appropriately without putting the other person down, without character assassinating the other person, without coming off like I am out of control. And so being able to stick up for yourself requires you to be able to express yourself calmly, intelligently, knowing what boundary has been crossed, knowing why you need to set the boundary. And you also have to know that you have the right to express yourself in this way. Another thing to think about when you want to push someone back is that you cannot be tied to an outcome. You cannot presume that because you say something, the other person is going to listen to you. And so just because you say, hey, I don't like when you come into my room and you go through my closets without asking me, that does not mean your roommate is going to listen to you. It might mean that your roommate is just going to say, sure, okay, I get it. I'll never do it again. And when you're at work, your roommate does it again. And so when you're sticking up for yourself, it's important that you're recognizing this is your first step at negotiating what has just taken place, with the hopes that this person can hear you, is going to honor you, and isn't going to do it again. So you're not tied to the outcome. Another thing to think about when you're wanting to push a person back so that you can stick up for yourself is that your peace cannot be tied to the idea that this person's character or reactions or behavior is going to absolutely change. When you set a boundary, it's almost like you have to be very loosey-goosey about it, in the sense that I'm going to open my mouth, I'm going to tell you what I think, I'm going to tell you what I need, I'm going to say it maturely, I'm not going to character assassinate anyone. I'm going to just be calm about what it is that I think and feel is taking place. At the same time, you're not tied to an outcome, and you are not thinking that because you opened your mouth, this guarantees the other person is going to change. I think it is immature of someone to say something to their partner and think that just because you said something, your partner is going to change. And so when we're negotiating a boundary, we're actually in negotiations. We're saying, this is what I think and this is what I feel. Now I want to see what you think and what you feel. And now I'm going to hold on to myself and see if your behavior changes. What you're looking for is you want to see if this person values you. You want to see if this person actually listens to you. Does this person have empathy for you? Is this person fair? Is this person interested in a reciprocal relationship or partnership with you? When you want to push someone back and stick up for yourself, you have to accept the consequences. So again, you have to state your case, but you also have to be loose and untethered to an outcome. So if you're going to confront your best friend about talking about you behind your back, or hearing through another friend that your best friend was talking about you poorly behind your back, if you're going to talk to your friend about that, you have to accept the consequences. You have to be able to have insight and foresight. You have to be able to imagine what your friend is going to say. And you have to understand that however she responds is how she is going to respond. And so if she gets angry, you have to accept the consequences of that. If she no longer wants to be your friend, you have to accept the consequences of that. If she's going to go and text your friend who told you what she said, and this gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that all has to be part of the consequences, accepting the consequences of an outcome that you could not control. And so when we confront someone, we always have to recognize that we're not in control of the outcome, because you're not in control of the other person. And whatever happens next, you have to be willing to accept those consequences. So you catch your boyfriend lying, you catch your girlfriend cheating, and you want to stick up for yourself. You want to tell the person that you trusted them to be faithful, and you have reason to believe that they are unfaithful. You must accept how you feel, accept that you have a right to express your need, express your want, trust your intuition. Codependents are notorious for talking themselves out of trusting their intuition. If you've come from a narcissistic background, meaning your childhood, or if you were raised by a narcissist, or if you were in a narcissistic relationship for any extent of time, you may have been gaslit and trauma bonded to the point where you no longer trust your instincts. So you're learning to stick up for yourself. You're learning about boundaries. You're learning about speaking your truth and staying in your body and honoring how you feel. And so you confront the person that you think has been unfaithful. You have to accept the consequences of confronting this person. This person might react very well. This person might react poorly. But the idea is that when you confront this person, whatever happens next, so if they say that they think that you're crazy, or if they say that they think that you're just insecure, or if they lie again, you have to go walk through this process all over again, meaning that accept how you feel, think about what you're listening to, and walk through the stages of in the moment of continually sticking up for yourself while remaining cool. I know it's not easy. It's not easy to do this. I'm just giving you a template that you can use and that you can practice so that you understand you can't control the outcome once you stick up for yourself, but you have to accept the consequences. Ultimately, you're in control, meaning you can go gray rock, you can shutty, you can go no contact, you can block people on social media, you can end your relationship, you can file for divorce, you can move out of the apartment, you could move across the country, you can move to strike your partnership as null and void, you can speak to an attorney. There are so many things that you can get up and walk out of the room. You can end the conversation on the phone. You can shut your phone off. Like, you don't have to tolerate being abused. Now, lots of times when you stick up for yourself, the person that you are confronting isn't going to be happy. Because lots of times when we're highly agreeable, we tend to attract people who are highly disagreeable. And they like us because you're agreeing with them, which is good for them. You're not confronting them. You're easy to tolerate. You're easy to be around because you're not going to confront them. And so it's difficult when you start sticking up for yourself, when you start setting a boundary. People usually like this who are highly disagreeable, who can be antisocial, who could even be clingy with you and just want you to be their source of everything. When you start pushing that person back, they're not going to be happy. And that's why I think it's important that when you stick up for yourself, you have to recognize that you have to accept the consequences of that. And if you need to set a stronger boundary, then you need to set the boundary. You need to go all the way. You can't back down once you begin setting a boundary. So another thing is that you won't crumble if this person decides to no longer speak to you, be your friend, or have anything to do with you. And you also recognize that you might be the person that needs to walk away. Because you can't control the outcome, because you can't control how this other person reacts to you needing to stick up for yourself, you have to help your brain be liberated, because fear prevents us from setting boundaries. We're afraid of abandonment, we're afraid of the repercussions, we're afraid of a smear campaign, we're afraid of this losing our job sometimes. We're just afraid of rocking the boat. So the limbic brain gets activated. And we also feel lots of times, and we have been gaslit to believe that it's our fault, that we are upset. It's our fault. And so how do you set a boundary with someone like a narcissist who has seeded this idea into your head that it's your fault that we're actually having difficulties? How do you set a boundary when that is your programming? Right? So I think one of the things that we can do is we can help prepare our brain for the OK Corral movement. We can help prepare our brain to come out of the limbic brain by thinking clearly about the possibility that this person may abandon us and learning to be okay with that, which is, if we could all do that, holy Hannah, we would really ascend spiritually and consciously to a place that is so foreign to so many of us. We'd be in a state of detachment, healthy detachment, spiritual detachment, where we would, and it's weird because when you think about spirituality and oneness, it means that you understand there's no such thing as separation. But to get there, you need to detach from your ideas about other people. You need to detach from your fears. You need to heal your abandonment, which means you're pulling back from codependency. You're pulling back from seeking the outer world's validation, which is amazing. Really, the journey from codependency is a spiritual journey because you eventually come to a place where you realize that it is so dysfunctional to seek the validation from the external world, and that is the hook. Whether it's social media with likes and followers and whatever, or it's a narcissistic relationship in which a narcissist has lured you in and conditioned you to believe that your job is to seek their constant approval. And at any point in time, they can pull that approval away from you and cause you to implode, cause a severe emotional reaction in you, to the point where you end up fawning and people-pleasing as a trauma response to gain the graces of the narcissist back or the toxic person back. Your job really on this planet as a spiritual evolving being is to end that cycle of attachment to others. And if you could do that, that's pretty amazing. You're going to experience a tremendous spiritual awakening. And so we can help our brains by recognizing that that is the goal, that we want to live in a spiritually detached place, yet know we are extensions of everything. There is only one oneness, essentially, that we all are a part of. And we can do that by helping our brain recognize that this person is a grown adult and they can walk away if they get highly offended. And I may need to also walk away if this person can't meet me halfway, because I'm developing insight and foresight. I can see what's going to happen if I don't start setting these boundaries. The writing is on the wall. So that's a really important key to start practicing in your mind. Setting boundaries with other people and sticking up for yourself means that you are thinking like an adult and you are learning to be comfortable with disagreements with other people. This is a very adult move. You know, to be able to sit across from your spouse or your partner or your children or your mother or your father and know that you disagree with them, know that they disagree with you and not implode is amazing. It's so liberating, it's so freeing, and it brings so much contentment and peace, and you can experience so much joy and authenticity when you recognize that it's okay that people disagree. So sticking up for yourself and the ability to push people back and to assert a boundary before doing so will require you to grow more comfortable with the idea that not everybody has to agree with you. You see, just because you stick up for yourself doesn't mean that the person that you're speaking to is going to agree with you. Just because you say, hey, I don't like that we handle our business meetings this way, and I feel like you're being a little pushy, or I feel like you're being a little intimidating and I don't like it, doesn't mean that your partner is going to agree with you. So it's important that we recognize that when we stick up for ourselves, sometimes it's going to end up where we just have to agree to disagree. Another thing to remember when you are learning to push people back is that in some cases, you sticking up for yourself is going to lead to a negotiation. It may not lead to where you take the ball and you go home, meaning that everything goes your way. If you think about a 2-year-old thinks and expects everything should go her way. Even a 3-year-old thinks everything should go their way. And if they're not, they could be a little passive-aggressive little buggers, and do things that they're not supposed to do on spite. And if you think about a lot of adults that a lot of adults act that way. Right? So you say something to your best friend and you think she hears you or you think he hears you, and then you find out that he's done some passive-aggressive move. He suddenly forgot to call the Uber for you. Even though he said he was going to call the Uber, you don't know, you don't have a ride home. And he forgot to call the Uber for you, right? So it's so immature. It's so passive aggressive. It's like ridiculous, right? And so when you are learning to stick up for yourself, you have to remember that you may end up negotiating and you may not win. You may not walk away with the whole kit and caboodle. Let's say you're married and your spouse wants to invite, 50 people for Thanksgiving dinner. And you're feeling overwhelmed because you do the bulk of the cooking, you do the bulk of the cleaning, you do the bulk of the shopping, and you're going to end up being the one who is entertaining the guests. And let's say you wanted to invite maybe 30 people from your side. So now we're talking about 80 something odd people for Thanksgiving dinner, right? No bueno. Or in some cases, maybe it's really bueno for you, but that would put me over the edge personally. So you're feeling like maybe, right? You're feeling aggravated. So you're acknowledging how you feel and you're recognizing that you have a right to express yourself. You're being authentic. You're staying in your body. You're listening to your feelings. You know that you can't stay passive aggressive and say yes when you mean no. You really need to speak up for yourself. And you also know that sticking up for yourself in this situation, because you feel that maybe a boundary has been crossed by inviting so many people without asking you first, which is fair, right? Sounds rational to me. And so now, rather than just stuff your feelings like a codependent person would, or somebody who is highly agreeable and somebody who doesn't know how to express themselves, you're learning to stick up for yourself. So you say to your partner, I think we need to discuss our guest list because I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling a little disrespected because I feel like you should have told me, or at least we should have come together and discussed the guest list prior to sending out an evite. So you've addressed this issue with your partner comfortably, consciously, compassionately, and sufficiently and adequately. You didn't character assassinate your partner. You just said, this is how I feel, this is why I feel what I feel, and this is what I think we could have done. And you can also explain that, had I invited 50 people without asking you, we would literally have 100 people for dinner. So now you're talking about insight and foresight. That's in that situation. But you can also recognize that if you don't set a boundary in this relationship now around this type of situation, you have other holidays to contend with. You need your partner to know that this is not cool for you, for them to go ahead and invite people to your home for dinner, a dinner that you're going to be responsible to shop and cook for, without asking you, without a conversation. When you're having this conversation, you're also recognizing that there is always the possibility that your partner is not going to agree with you, that they might turn around and say, well, you told me I could invite whoever I wanted. Now what do you do? Because maybe you actually said that. You didn't expect your partner to invite 50 people, but you did say invite whoever you wanted. So now you need to negotiate. So now you have to stay calm and you have to acknowledge, well, I did say that and I'm sorry I said that. It seems that you took me literally. What would I have done if you invited 100 people? So we need to talk about this and we need to resolve this issue because I am more comfortable with both of us perhaps inviting 25 people. So how do you feel about cutting your list to 25? This way we have 50 people for dinner. So my point is that sticking up for yourself is a very complicated process. And it's very easy to tell someone, oh, you should just stick up for yourself. But if you're just going to go and confront someone and yell at them and think it's always going to have to be your way, and you're just going to cut people off because it doesn't always go your way, you really have to rethink that because that's what a child does. An adult negotiates. An adult talks about how they feel. An adult gives the other person an opportunity to say, okay, let's see what's going to happen next. Of course, unless it is just such a blatant disrespect, your best friend is trying to hook up with your boyfriend. I'm sorry. I'm cutting you off. We're not negotiating anything. But again, it's situational. It's not a black and white situation. There's a lot of gray when we need to stick up for ourselves and stand up for ourselves. I just hope that this list of things that you can think about when you're considering sticking up for yourself makes a lot of sense to you. And I hope that you're able to integrate it into your mindset, and maybe it'll even help you make positive mindset shifts about what it means to actually stick up for yourself, hold on to yourself, and create a desired outcome that is best for you and maybe even the people that you do love and care about in your life. Namaste, everybody. My name is Lisa Romano. I'm the Breakthrough Life Coach, and if you'd like to listen to one of my books for free, all you have to do is click the link in the description box. And if you'd like to learn more about my 12-week Breakthrough Coaching Program, it's my signature program, my legacy program, that allows you to heal from codependency. It'll teach you how to break those codependent programs that are subconscious in your mind that are keeping you stuck. All you have to do is click the link in the description box to learn more. Namaste, everybody. Be careful out there. And don't forget to use this magnificent thing in your head that's called your brain. Don't forget to think and live above the veil of consciousness and refuse to allow the subconscious programs in your subconscious mind to keep you stuck. Bye for now. Hey, if you love this content, don't forget to check out the next video, and you can go to my website and take the codependency quiz.